Hi everyone, I'm making this video for you to help you get started making your coil vessel. So remember, the first thing we want to do is we want to have a template for our project before we begin, so we have an idea of what it is that we're trying to make. What is the shape of the pot that we're trying to make? So remember, use your sketchbook, open it up to a new page, rip out a page, and you're gonna fold that piece of paper in half. And then you are gonna draw one half of your idea, one half of your pot that we're gonna cut out. So I would recommend keeping it relatively simple, and you don't need to do the entire length of the paper. It can be a little bit smaller. So I'll do a really simple design where I have my lip, a little neck, a shoulder, a belly, come back in, maybe a little foot. Something nice and simple. And then I'm gonna cut that out. And remember, this is the template that I'll be using for my project. So I wanna keep these pieces of paper. I don't wanna throw them away. So this would be the shape of my final project. This is the template that I want to keep, that I'm going to actually use. I'm going to cut that in half now right along the fold. And this is the piece that I'm actually going to use to help me make the form of my coil pot for this project. So getting started, you need to have a template, or at the very least have a plan for what do you want your pot to look like before you begin. Remember, I have a few different ideas here that I made. I also put some ideas in the presentation that I shared with all of you yesterday that's in Canvas, titled Coil Vessel Presentation. So you can look there as well for some ideas. So let's get started. The first thing we obviously need is our clay. So I'm gonna take about a chunk of my clay. Remember, use your string to cut that. And then for the base, I only need a little bit. So I'm just gonna take a little piece, like maybe this much, a golf ball size amount of clay. And I'm gonna flatten this out. I'm just gonna use my hand. You could use your rolling pin if you wanted, but honestly, I find it easier to just use the heel of my hand to gently flatten it, flip it over a couple times. It's not a very large piece of clay. And you want it to be about a 1/2 inch thick. And then if you wanna trace something circular, like your sponge to use, you could do that. You can freehand if you want to as well. It's up to you. But you're gonna cut out that base to begin, and our base is gonna be nice and flat. So whatever shape you want. There we go, about a 1/2 inch thick. Doesn't need to be a perfect circle. We're not worried about that. We just want it to be a nice round shape to start. This is gonna be the bottom of my project. And the next thing I'm gonna do is roll out some coils. So again, use that same little block of clay that I cut off of my larger piece. And then I'm just gonna take, again, just about a golf ball size amount of clay. I'm gonna put that base to the side, and I'm gonna roll out a coil right now. So you may wanna roll it in your hands first, so you get that kind of hot dog shape. And then I always recommend rolling from the tips of your finger all the way to the heel of your hand. So rolling nice and even. Try to make sure that the pressure is evenly distributed, and notice how I move my hand when I roll a coil. I don't stay in one spot. I move my hand around, and I'm not pressing down very hard. A lot of kids, when they do this, they press too hard and then it gets really flat. You want it to be nice and round, and you want it to be about the width of your pinky, okay? So nothing too thin, nothing too thick. About your pinky is what you want. And we don't need it to be very long, because we're gonna build our coils up just one at a time on here. So I'm gonna take my needle tool, and I'm gonna score that clay. We've done this already before. You've seen examples of this already. Remember to score the clay, really rip it up. Like that. And then I'll do the same thing with my coil. So again, all the way along my coil. I already know this coil is gonna be too long, but that's okay. I'll just cut off the extra. it is imperative, absolutely important, must happen. You have to score both pieces of clay every time you join them together. That may seem tedious, but you have to do it, otherwise your work will break apart when it dries. So now I'm going to use my slip. Make sure you have a fair amount of slip mixed up. I could probably stand to make a little bit more. Remember, you want it to be kind of like yogurt. I like to use the end of my needle tool. If you don't want to get super messy, you can just use the end of your needle tool to apply that slip. Again, just dab it all the way around. Don't rub it into the clay, just kind of dab it lightly. And do the same thing along my coil, just a little bit along there. And then I'm going to place these on top of each other. I'm going to press them down to make sure that they really are stuck together. And then you can see I have extra here. So I'm going to use my needle tool. I'm just going to cut the excess off. Like that. I'm going to join those together. And this is where I'm going to start right away using my template. So you're going to have to use a side view. This isn't going to work from the top. It's going to have to be looking from the side. I'm going to cut this a little bit. Extra paper off the bottom there so I can really see. There we go. So again, this is where my foot is going to be at the bottom, and I can already see I'm going to start building my pot. So my next coil is going to come right along here. So again, when we start from the very beginning, it may not be super useful right off the bat, but start double checking right away, getting in the habit of making sure that the shape of your pot really matches the shape of your template. And now this is where you can decide if you want to smooth this out or if you want to keep that ridge, that little edge there visible. So you can see on this coil vessel that I made, I've smoothed all of my coils out. You don't even see any coils at all. For this one, I'm going to leave them visible, but I'm going to take my wood tool and I'm just going to really lightly just clean up that edge a little bit. Just like that. So their edges are really joined together. I don't have to do anything with the inside. I'm not going to worry about smoothing the inside. I'm just thinking about the outside right now. So I'm going to do the same thing again. I can even use my scraps that I had before, or if I want to, take a little bit more clay. We're just going to roll coils individually, one at a time. Again, same thing. Roll out that coil. If this starts happening to you where your coil gets really flat, you can always try to kind of bring it back like this. But again, that usually happens when we press a little bit too hard. So really nice and gentle, moving your hand around. The more you do this, the easier it'll be, the better you'll get at it. And again, we're going for about the width of your pinky. So about the width of your pinky. Take your needle tool just like before. You can just see I have my seam right there. That's where my last coil ended up when I went all the way around. So maybe I'll decide to keep the seam right there. It's up to you if you want to move the seam to a different area. But I do find that doing coils one at a time gives you a lot more control, especially when we're just learning how to do this. Rather than doing a really long coil and making it tall really quickly, doing one at a time just gives us a little bit more precision as we work. And a little bit of slip. My clay is pretty wet, so I really don't need a lot of slip. Your clay should be wet as well, so you shouldn't need a lot. You shouldn't be using a lot of water. If your clay is starting to get dry, obviously spray with a little bit of water. And then same thing, I'm going to start there. I'm going to move this all the way around like that. Now this is where, again, I'm going to start paying attention to my template. So holding it to the side and noticing, okay, this has got to come out more sharply, right? I can see where that edge is right there. So I'm going to push this down and flare it out even a little bit more. So I can see, okay, this is where I'm starting to kind of try to match that angle. I'm gonna move this even a little bit further out. This is where I love working with clay because it's very responsive, right? If I want it to flare out, I just have to use my fingers to stretch that clay a little bit right now. And that angle's getting a little bit closer now to what I'm hoping, right? Same thing, I'm gonna go around my outside edge and I'm gonna clean up that seam again, making sure that my coils are really nicely joined together. I'm not gonna worry about smoothing everything out right now, because if I do that, I'm probably gonna have to go back over it again later on, knowing that this clay is really wet and every little bump is gonna show up right now. So I'll wait till it's a little bit more in that leather hard stage to really smooth things out. But I can at least start right now, getting a little bit of that shape that I want. Let's do another coil. Again, take a little bit, hold it in my hands. The wider your vessel is, the longer your coil is going to need to be. But again, I generally don't make my coils much longer than the board. There we go. To my slip. I'll probably have to make some new slip here pretty soon. And again, I want my pot to flare out right now. That's the shape that I have. So notice how when I put these coils on, I'm not stacking them right on top of each other. I'm flaring them out a little bit at a time. Then I'm gonna use my fingers to kind of refine that shape a little bit, kind of press these together. If you want to smooth the inside, you can. That's definitely an option. I always just tell students to be careful when you do that, to not pinch your walls and make them too thin. Sometimes when students do a lot of smoothing work, their work starts getting very, very, very thin. So as long as you're keeping yourself kind of in check with how thick your walls are, you can do some smoothing on the inside if you like. And again, keep checking with your template. You can see I need to flare my edge out a lot more, right? If I'm gonna keep following this template, this has gotta move out quite a bit more. So I could take my fingers, and again, the clay is really flexible right now, so I can flare that out. A little bit more. And again, I'm holding this up sideways to the camera so that you guys can see. If you see that angle's looking better now, I'm really following that a little bit more closely. You might decide to do that standing upright like this. It's up to you. But again, use your template. It's really gonna help you measure and get that angle correct for seeing what kind of shape you really want your project to be. I'm gonna flare mine out even just a little bit more. All of these little cracks and things on the inside, again, we're not gonna worry about those because one, they're not gonna be seen in our project, but two, really the part that makes the most is a little bit easier, I think, to kind of refine at the end, obviously, is the outside. So I can go in, again, do one quick pass in between those coils just to define them a little bit more. And then I'm gonna keep going. And we're gonna repeat this pattern, building up our pot one coil at a time. One of the things that you will notice is when you're starting to bring your coils back in, instead of putting them out on top of each other, you'll start putting them in toward each other, and we will get there as well. You know, so when I roll a coil out, I'm really moving my hand around. I'm not staying in one spot. And this is maybe the last one I'll put on just for this demonstration. All right, and again, once I've attached that coil, I don't just set it on there and leave it. I do a little bit of refining, right? I really press that coil into the coil beneath it. I refine it. I'm gonna take my template again, hold that up to my work, check my angle like this, make sure that I'm really close to following that edge that I have on my project. Again, holding it underneath I think is a little bit easier so you can really see that angle. And then again, maybe on this one I'll do a little bit of smoothing on the inside just because that coil I made was a little big. It's a little bit wider. One of the benefits also of doing one coil at a time is it makes your work a little bit more structurally sound. As we do things like this that flare at a really sharp angle, sometimes these have a tendency to want to flop and fall over. So doing just one coil at a time makes sure that our clay is able to support itself, that it's not going to collapse. So I'll spend a little bit of time again going through, refining my coils. And again, you can see that I'm leaving that coil line in between each of my coils on this one. If I decide to at the end, I could always go back at the very end and smooth those out. But just for now, I'll leave them. Maybe I'll decide later on what I want to do. All right, so this should be enough to get you at least started. Remember, template, make a template. Make a base to start. So again, typically your work is going to be a circle like this. And make your base a little smaller than what you think. You can see already, like this circle base of my sponge. Look at how large my pot is getting already just from that base, right? It is going to be quite a bit bigger than my template. So make your base perhaps a little bit smaller than what you think it needs to be, and then doing your coils just one at a time to build them up. Thanks for watching, you guys, and I will see you in class. We'll keep working on this together.